Welcome to Aunty K's, your favorite radical queer indigenous auntie, bringing you tarot every day. Hello everyone, welcome to Aunty K's Tarot. Today we are going to be comparing my Marseille decks, with the exception of my cat Marseille, because they're all cats, there's no people, so it doesn't participate in diversity. And what we are doing here is looking at the diversity in my Marseille decks. And these are the Marseille decks still in my collection. I have passed some on because they weren't diverse. And some of them are popular, and that would be the Squid Cake and the Trompe de la Luna. And so I passed those on. So we are going to look at these decks with a new one in my collection. There is Marseille Prendre Vie, which is my deck. Le Tarot Archetypal, the Multi Marseille by Tom Benjamin Tarot, the Diverse Marseille. Man, she changed her channel name. I'm going to have to put it up in here because I forget. And the Metonia Marseille, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. It's by Bouchette Design on Etsy. Metanoia Marseille. It is really lovely. And the Keymaster Tarot, which is somewhere between Marseille and playing cards, but enough that it definitely plays in here. Okay, so we are going to get down to this. We've got two that are low diversity, two that are like the halfway point. And so my deck, the Marseille Prendre Vie and Le Tarot Archetypal, both of these decks have the same level of racial diversity. Diversity beyond that isn't really apparent in the Le Tarot Archetypal based on its design style, all right? So both of these decks represent a world majority, and as such, the diversity is really high. It matches the world majority. So some of these cards have like a couple of brown people or appendages, and then we get into the brownness. So how can I tell in this deck? I mean, you can tell the skin color is very, very obvious in Le Tarot Archetypal. We see black people representing black Egyptians, and in the Marseille Prendre Vie, we see people from across the world. And sometimes in this deck, like they have a mime kind of mask on, but you can see bits of their skin, and so this is really how I tell. And it's just, I don't know, I think it's obvious. It's a really cool deck. It's abstract, and a lot of things are zoomed in differently, and it's a really fascinating deck. The knights in this deck are all just horses, so there's less people to be represented in the Le Tarot Archetypal. And but where there are people, it's highly diverse, and working with it, it just gives it a whole nother feel. Like this is a black deck to me, and I think it is one of my coolest decks. It's in amongst my favorites. It is hard for me to shuffle this deck, but otherwise it's really cool. And I do like the pips in this deck. I will say, reading the swords is a thing you have to get used to, because you count the hilts on it, which is different, but it makes for a cleaner design. And I haven't had a struggle with it, so there's that. I definitely did it first, and then I just got used to the swords. So there we go. So these are my two decks that represent a world majority Marseille. These are my two decks that represent a diverse Marseille in a level that I am happy with. Numbers, they are racially on par, but the multi-Marseille, it includes other types of diversity as well, sexual and gender diversity, and ability diversity, and so it reaches a different level of diversity than the diverse Marseille. I really like both of these decks. They're my only two Marseille other than... No, the Cat Marseille is a different art style too. Like, it keeps some of the weirdness, but they're the only two that, like, have Marseille style art. And they both did it in a way I like. I think maybe the fact that Marseille decks are all white typically, although that's starting to change, I think that's probably part of what made Marseille art look even uglier to me, because that just made it visually less appealing. And I want to give props to both creators, because these are both white creators who went beyond that 25% mass market appeal diversity. And they brought it up to like a 50-50 kind of representation. And that's appreciated, and that shows me that both of these people are people who've done their homework in unpacking their own inherent white supremacy, because they saw enough other people in the world to say, hey, there isn't just a small spattering of you that I have to include a few of to not get called a racist. I'm going to go beyond not being called a racist and make an actually diverse deck and stumble around and do my best at it. And I really appreciate that. I do. I really do appreciate that. So, both of these decks have a traditional pip setup going on. Both have played with the color palettes in different ways. And I like this pineapple in here. And I enjoy them both. And if you're looking for traditional Marseille decks to read from that have a honest, put the work in, representation of diversity. So both of these are decks that have put the work in. If you're looking for a traditional, in appearance, Marseille deck that is more than a token version of diverse, I recommend both of these decks, and they're both available on Make Playing Cards. Okay, so we have the Metatonia and the Keymaster. The Keymaster, like, it's not even 25% diverse. It gives you a couple ambiguous people, and then everyone is white. That's what it is. It's really visually attractive deck, and I think that's how it gets used. It doesn't get used as much now that I have more diverse Marseille decks. And that's not surprising. We will see what happens with this deck. It's probably one I'm going to keep. It's one I envision keeping, even though my use of it is now pretty low. It does this really interesting thing with the pips where it tries to combine playing cards in Marseille, and it's more real in the swords and batons, but it can be hard to see. So that's the Keymaster Tarot. And these two I'm doing separately because the Keymaster's diversity is non-existent. It's just a couple token people who are ambiguous, and maybe that wasn't even by design. Who knows? And it is mass market. Whereas none of these other decks are, except for the Cat Marseille. So the Metanoia Marseille. It's gorgeous. And I think it's like the Fyodor Pavlov of Marseille decks. It's just a really gorgeous, beautiful deck. Let us zoom in. Okay. So it has real diversity, unlike the Keymaster. And the people, the art is absolutely gorgeous. It is not traditional Marseille art. And obviously that's something I can appreciate. Neither is the Marseille Prendre de Vie. The people are beautifully done. The clothing is beautiful. The background touches, which you especially see in the pips, gorgeous, gorgeous. And so here we have some cards with a few different people in it, and a couple ambiguous people, and few ambiguous people. This card's interesting. Like, I'm not sure what's intended with this king. To me, this king looks kind of like a woman dressed up as a king, but they do have a beard. It's the hair. I don't know. And all their bodies are very... I draw like this too. This is how I was taught to draw, these long, slender, flowing bodies. White people, but they're really gorgeous. So, and I'd say there's age diversity in here too. You know, the one card I don't like is the Queen of Coins. Does this hermit kind of look like Hagrid? Okay. the Queen of Coins is one of my favorites, right? And perhaps that's obvious by how gorgeous I made my Queen of Coins. Like, I don't know, Queen of Coins should, like, stun you. She looks kind of constipated. I love the water in the jugs in here. Deck has a couple extra cards. I left them in. And it takes time. Showed up a few times. This deck arrived on Wednesday on my most busy work week ever. It was the week that marked my 2-year anniversary on the hotlines. And I don't know, maybe this coming week really does, because this past week ended when I started. But I guess it marks the end of my 2nd year, not the beginning of... Anyway, so it was super busy on the last day I worked this week. And that was my busiest day ever. I had 24 calls. Several of them were quite long. I used this deck several times. It Takes Time came up twice. In one reading, the other extra card came up as well. I really like, you know, it's dark, it's getting light, the coloring, I like that on here. The pips are really gorgeous. They're pretty easy to read. They're color-coded. I like these bits of color swirling in behind several of them. The color palette on this deck is gorgeous. It's soft. It's so elegant. I love when it does this on the cards. I think the color palette helps differentiate the swords to the wands. But I have not been confused. So, I think that's appropriate. So, I used it out of the box. The box ripped. Try and open it right here. I imagine I will use this deck because it's pretty during its testing phase. And this isn't a testing phase. This is a new phase. I will bring it out for a testing phase after its newness and see where it hits and lands. But yeah, there was one time on the night I used this at work where I put this deck back and grabbed my Marseille because I knew I was going to need a more diverse deck for that reading. And the client did end up asking me if I was able to identify somebody racially. And the Marseille Prendre Vie, the Clarity Tarot, and the Next World Tarot are my go-to decks for that because they represent everybody really well. So yeah, that came in the way for that. And there was another reading where I didn't reach for it, and we ended up talking about hierarchies at work and stuff like that. And that is easier to see when you have, and if you have a work reading where, you know, like this, and depending on what it's about, you know, it can talk to this really well, that, you know, it's run by an old white guy. He likes things the way they are. He likes the way the world is ordered, and he's struggling really hard to come outside his sheltered understanding to bring diversity in. And so he's brought in some tokenized diversity, but he finds it really disruptive. And so he can, you know, it shows and it comes out. And as a result, any complaints that, you know, you or your other token coworker have are going to be seen as really disruptive to this boss. So the other thing is that this deck is very flexible and easy to shuffle. It's not thick, but it is matte, and so that the cards, like, they don't slide very well. So I will put that out there. It might have been harder to see that in this deck. You know, in a deck like mine or the Tarot Archetypal, when a white person shows up over top of the brown people in a situation that's not going well for the client, assuming this is brown client, like, they stand out as, like, this, you know, this is important too. Like, this person's whiteness is important in the reading. And you know, it might not always be, but sometimes it is a factor in what is going on, especially in work situations, also in relationship situations. That racial hierarchy plays in ways that nobody is willing to admit and talk to. And so in a deck where it's going to stand out that they show up in a certain position and sit above everybody else in the reading, it stands out and it shows me that reality. So I find that useful in my readings. And okay, so yeah, there's only like 3, but that actually turns out to be enough for it to be like, hey, at this moment, it's a problem and it's standing out. I appreciate decks where I can do that. It would stand out in the multi-Marseille and the diverse Marseille as well, to a point. I'd have to look for it a little bit harder, but it would not stand out in this deck. And I feel a lot of us, including myself, are going to give this deck a bit of a pass because it's beautiful. There you go, folks.